Hello, I'm Paddy from creativemedia.org.uk and I'm here with another tool review. This time I'm reviewing the Erbauer track saw. If you're into your French herbs, then this is a saw for you. Probably not the best saw for chopping up herbs, I would say. I've had this for quite a while. It cost me £150 from Screwfix, £149.99 I think, and I compared it with various other saws. This one had better angles. It would do 48-degree bevel, and also would cut 65mm in depth, all of which seemed a bit better than the other saws of a similar price. And the brilliant thing with this saw is it comes with a couple of clamps, or ray guns, pew pew, which are good fun, very useful, and I'll explain a bit more about why these particular clamps are useful. And it also comes with a huge rail. In fact, two chunks of rail, so these join together with some metal strips and Allen keys, so you can separate them into two shorter rails, or one super long rail. And of course you can buy more of these rails and add them on and have like an endless rail where you just saw for miles. So that's really useful. And I was saying about these particular clamps, they slot into a nice groove on the bottom of the rail, so you can clamp your rail onto your work, for instance a door, and then you can slice bits off a door with this clamped on, and you cut exactly where you think you're going to cut. Apart from you've got to allow for the 2mm thick blade. So I've made that mistake several times and found I've cut things a little bit too far because I've not allowed for the thickness of the blade. Anyone who uses a circular saw will know about that kind of thing. Right, the saw itself. Well, I was hoping for a kind of do-everything saw. I've watched all those YouTube videos where somebody sort of shows you how you can really easily make some impressive thing, and they go off and they use a table saw, then they use a track saw, then they use a chop saw, and they've got all these gadgets. They've got a router, they've got a router and just everything. And I don't have the space for all that stuff, and even if I did buy it all, I'd feel a bit stupid having spent, you know, £1,000 or so on workshop machinery, which I didn't use very much. So I figured this could do everything, and it kind of can, and it kind of can't. I'll tell you about some of that later. But first I'll go through the features of this saw and what I think is good and what I think is less good. Here's the bottom of it. Nice and smooth, fairly smooth, and this is the rail that goes onto the saw. There's two orange bits here which are supposed to, another one there as well, which are supposed to lock the saw onto the rail, and they don't seem to, not for me anyway. I feel like I've just probably broken them. I don't know which way you're meant to put this little clicky thing and how tight you're meant to put this to get it on the saw, and it would jam sometimes, and it was just a real pain. And there is also, which I've removed here, another thing, a little metal sticky out bit which is supposed to lock the saw onto the rail as well. And again, that jammed sometimes. I wasn't sure which way around it was meant to be. I didn't put it in the right position. I might have bent it a bit, so I've ended up just taking it off altogether because it's just being a real pain. What I've left on is this safety mechanism here, which is a sprung thing which prevents the saw from going backwards, which is meant to save your hands, and maybe more than your hands, when the saw jams, and gives you some kickback, which is a well-known circular saw problem, where the blade jams in the woods and all 1400 watts of the motor decides to push the saw back into your face or chop your hands off or something horrible. So takes a bit of getting used to, because with a saw you want to push it forwards and then pull it back, and you've got to click that little thing round before you pull it back each time. So you've got both your hands on the thing, and then you've got to take them off, turn that thing, pull it back, get them on again. But it's alright, I'm not complaining about that. What else will it do? Well, we've got the turn it around. We've got the depth control here. That just controls how far down the saw goes. This feels really cheap and nasty. It works, but it's made of plastic, and it's wobbly and stuff. But when you tighten it up, it does stop the saw going further than you want it. You have to make sure it's tight enough. A few times I've just kind of loosely tightened it because I was worried I was going to break it, and then I've pushed the saw down and it's just slipped and gone all the way down and made a huge, great big deep hole in my workbench, as well as the bit of wood I was sawing. I've not checked how super accurate it is, but generally if you kind of set it just beyond the width of the thickness of the wood, or just slightly less, even better, you can actually saw through a piece of wood on a surface and just leave about 0.5 millimetre of material which you can snap off the wood, rather than actually sawing beyond the thickness of the material and going into your bench. A lot of people recommend using a piece of insulation foam, which I've been using as well, which is sort of a bit like polystyrene, and you can put your work on that and then you can cut grooves in that and it's not a problem. There's also a little flippy bit here, which is a bit awkward, and what that is for is if you're using the rails has a thickness, so you use it in that position, and if you're not using the rail, you're just using it like a normal electric circular saw, actually on the material itself, you flip that up, and that ensures that the depth is still matching these numbers, otherwise you'll cut too deep. Here at each end there is the adjuster for doing the angle. There's one at this end as well. Again, they're kind of fairly plasticky, but they're okay. And it will go around to 48 degrees, I think, of angle. I don't really trust this. I set it to 45, trying to do a kind of frame shape, and it didn't seem accurate to me. My frame wasn't accurate, because I was hoping to be able to cut accurate bevels and make beveled frames using this, and it really didn't work very well. And also, using it on the rails, really awkward, it tends to fall off the rails. While I'm around this side, here is the speed control. I quite often forget about that. I tend to use it on full speed. It's recommended to use it on full speed if you're cutting wood. But if you're cutting other materials, you can adjust it from number 1 to number 6. Oh, it's got a bit of kind of a click at position 6. Don't know what that means. Here we have some sprung tightening up things, bolts I guess they are, and I haven't got it with me at the moment. There is a rail which you can slot into these slots here, and that enables you to adjust a bar on the edge of here. When you tighten these bolts on it, it leaves little dents in it, which you would have thought something like this would not leave dents in the metal. It should have, a block in the way, like most things you tighten like this. And there's no measurements on it either, so you can't actually get a measurement of how far out from the edge you're actually cutting. That would have been useful. And here are some features which I've just worked out on the top of the saw. There's a position here, which if you want to just mark a piece of wood, you switch it to there, and it cuts, 1 or 2 millimetres of depth, so you can ignore the depth setting bit here entirely and just use that setting. The middle setting is just normal cutting, so you set your depth and it cuts to that depth. And this setting here is a blade changing one, which I'd never worked out. And actually when I looked into changing the blade, I took off this whole front panel here. I undid all these screws. Well, I tried to undo all the screws, but 2 of them were stuck and they ended up totally mangling up So I had to drill them out and get this panel off, which was quite a pain, and it made me think the quality of the build is not wonderful. But I have discovered that I didn't need to take this off at all. That was quite handy, because cleaning out all the sawdust is something you'll probably have to do every now and then. It does get a bit stuck up with sawdust. But if I set it on the blade changing option, I'm going to make sure it's unplugged before doing this. It definitely is, but always good to check that it's unplugged before messing around. So I can put the blade down, and it stays down, which it doesn't usually do, and it stays down with the bolt hole in the middle there. And there is another, I'm going to be careful with my legs here, there's another button on the top here. If I press that down, it locks the blade in position, in theory. Yeah, it locks it in position, and then I can undo that centre Allen bolt and get the blade out and put in a new one. I've seen some people complain that this blade is not ideal. It's probably meant to be a bit of a general purpose blade. It's worked fine for me on wood and plywood. I've not tried it on things like plastic sheeting or anything like that. You might want a finer one for that. And if you're doing along the grain cuts, which I have done some of, possibly one with less teeth would be a better one to use. And to stop it being locked down, you just press the blade down again and it jumps up. Lastly, to actually get the thing going, there's a bit of a safety mechanism here. You've got to press in that top thing there, and then you pull the trigger. You can't actually push the thing down unless you press in the top, and then it will shift down, and you pull in the trigger to actually get it going. It has a soft start, so it takes a little while to get up to speed, so you should probably wait for it to get going before pushing forward into the material. The good thing with the safety mechanism is if you pick the thing up, I mean you'd usually pick it up by that, but if you pick it up by the handle, there's a lot less risk of you actually starting it spinning and injuring yourself, because there's these two things. The downside is it's a bit painful on the thumb, just kind of pressing that thing in. It's a bit awkward, but again, it's something you get used to. Here is the Erbauer bag for collecting all your sawdust. It spurts out of this pipe on the end quite nicely. I'm not sure whether a Hoover would fit that. I think it doesn't look like a standard Hoover size, so you might need some kind of adapter if you wanted to attach your dust remover gadget to this, or a Hoover. The bag's alright. It's got a zip on the back to let all the sawdust out, and it's got a kind of wire structure to make it a bit solid. When it's fitted on the saw, you can rotate it all around to different angles, so you can keep it out of the way, but I'm never quite sure where it's meant to be really when you're sawing, whether it's meant to be sort of lower than the tube or higher than the tube. Really not sure. But yeah, it seems to work. It collects some of the dust, but a lot of dust goes everywhere else as well, and you'll probably find quite a lot of dust is stuck inside this mechanism. Usually you can remove it just by moving the blade up and down, maybe rotating it a bit. That kind of works. Compared to other hand tools I've used power drills and jigsaws, and I've even got a reciprocating saw. This does feel like a bit of a scary beast. You know, most hand tools you have to take plenty of care with. This one feels like you could actually chop off a whole limb with it. If you're going to have an accident with this, it's going to be a big accident, not a small accident. You're probably going to lose some part of you which you were quite attached to. So I do feel I've got to be particularly careful with this. I have had the blade jam up more than once, and it's not, you know, flown up in my face. It's always good to hold on with this handle and this handle as well. The handle's got a nice kind of rubbery finish, so it feels quite nice to hold. I've had a bit of a love-hate relationship with these rails. Quite often the saw will jam on them a bit, and I'm not quite sure why it's jamming. It doesn't seem to be the material actually jamming it. Hello, Puss. So it must be something to do with the rails, but the rails seem clean enough. I've even tried putting some graphite on them to make them a bit slipperier, more slippery. Nothing's really worked, and it seems a bit random when it jams and when it doesn't. So, and also quite often the kind of things I want to cut are not just great big sort of flat pieces of work like a door, for which this is brilliant. You know, if you've got a big bit of plywood or a chipboard or something that you want to cut, this is perfect. This is what it's made for. And being a plunge saw, of course, you can cut a hole in the middle of something as well. You'll have to sort of tidy up the edges, of course, because being a circular saw, it'll cut, you know, like a circle shape of depth rather than, you know, a nice straight up and down cut. But you just use a handsaw or something. So for cutting kitchen surfaces as well, that'd be ideal. But I quite often want, you know, to cut a plank into two to make a picture frame from, and of course this doesn't really work when the work is narrower than the rail. It's just not really going to work. You've got to kind of pile up other bits behind it and use clamps and things. But that said, this rubbery stuff on the back does grip quite well, so even if you just place it on a piece of work and hold it down, it does quite a good job of staying in position, because obviously you really don't want this to shift in the middle of your cuts, because your cut's going to go nasty. I have had some times when I've used, tried to use about 5 different clamps to keep the rail in position, and trying to cut 45-degree angles and things has been a bit of a nightmare. So I've had to make myself various jigs and things to try and make this saw here do the job of sort of 3 or 4 different tools. Slots are brilliant. Cutting slots is just ideal. If you cut 2 grooves and then just randomly cut between, you can snap out all the bits in between and cut a decent slot at a fixed depth. So that can save you quite a lot of chiselling time. You can just use this to do the job of a chisel. You can also shave off the edges of things. It's quite a clean cut. In fact, I've got a couple of pieces of very thin stuff. I've just trimmed off the edge of something here, and you can see how thin that is. That's probably about 1 millimetre thick, and that's just been trimmed off another piece of wood. So if you want to do some, careful. If you want to do some laminating, you can get a few bits of that and stick them together. Make yourself a guitar or a violin or something out of that. You don't have to buy lots of strips of laminated stuff. You could make your own out of whatever wood you wanted, whatever thickness you wanted. Well, up to 65 millimetres. I've tried some thick cuts on this. I've done a 44 millimetre cut, and you can see in this example it's got jammed a few times, which is less than ideal. I've had to sort of keep stopping and starting, which has given me a less than smooth finish. For cutting 45-degree angles, I've made myself a jig where I can bolt the rail of the saw onto my jig and then apply the saw to it and tighten that up, and then I can cut identical angles all day long like I would with a chop saw. I keep forgetting the name of those things. So all in all, I would recommend this saw. I've used it a lot and it's not gone wrong, unlike some of the other tools I've used. It's quite a reasonable price. It's a lot cheaper than the ones from companies like Festool, where you can pay 2 or 3 times the price of this one and not necessarily get all the things like rails and clamps and useful bits like that. It also comes with a bag to put the rails and the clamps in, so that's quite useful. And this thing is quite a handy standalone thing. The cable is of a useful length. It's not miles long, but probably about 6-8 foot long, probably. No, probably about 10 foot long. I'm guessing that. Maybe not 10, 8 foot. Let's say 8. I would recommend it for anyone who wants to kind of up their game, who's just sick of hand cutting stuff and not being able to cut a straight line. If you want to cut straight lines, this is definitely the tool for you. So thanks for watching, and enjoy your woodworking and straight line cutting.